Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Daryl Urbanski, your host as always. And today we are joined by Ruma Biswas, specialist coach in relationship systems and climate change at Inogru, plus partner and managing director at Progress U South Asia. Ruma's singular focus is to enable leaders and organizations to live their purpose without fear, using a psychological and system lens to the issue of climate change. She works with progressive organizations who have climate change and sustainability on their agenda. I've asked Ruma to join us here today to talk about the future of work, climate, and doing business in this new world. So Ruma, thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
Hey, thank you for inviting me.
Yes.
Pretty good this morning here and nice and bright. So I'm nice and bright as well.
Nice and bright. That's right. The sun is shining in here. So obviously, we're going to talk about climate and some other things, but how did you get started in business? Do you come from a family of entrepreneurs? Is this kind of like a family trade or?
No, I actually come from a very middle-class family with very middle-class parents, if you will. My mother was a housewife or a homemaker, if I use the newer term. And my father worked all his life in one company until he retired. So that's pretty much an ordinary, I would say, family background, not have any kind of entrepreneurial or business mindset or even capacity to think that way. In fact, it was the other way around. The business was always associated with loss. And there was always an element of fear around that, around business and the investments that are needed and all that. So it's pretty, I don't know how I ended up. It's pretty interesting that I ended up almost like an entrepreneur now. Yes.
Yeah. And you end up working in sales and that too. And so how did you go from, I'm going to just follow the court, get a good job to putting out your own sign and doing your own thing? How did you get to that?
Yeah, how did I get to putting up my own shingle, huh?
Yeah.
Like all good parents, my parents wanted the best for their children, so which in those days, which I'm talking about 80s, early 90s, it meant you had to do either medical or engineering in my country, which is in India. And it's so obviously you follow one path, and I followed the engineering path. And what happened quite early on, which I think shaped even who I am today to a large extent, is I actually chose the stream of mechanical engineering. And that was not done by women. So I ended up being the only woman in a class of 70 odd,
I'm sure you've got some interesting stories about that.
Yeah, but I think that was one of my earliest decisions, which was around, let's not follow the main path or the trodden path. Even though engineering was the trodden path. And my parents did not oppose. So I will always be thankful for that, I imagine.
That's powerful. I love that. Okay. So mechanical engineering, it's a good trade. Glad we have more women that are getting into that now. Glad you blazed that trail. And then, so what? You're like, forget mechanical engineering. I'm going to go to sales.
No, I did put in, so CAD CAM was just coming out around those times. So I did spend some time in a cement manufacturing company doing that. And that's when IT was picking up. So I made a move to IT, and then I figured technical stuff, maybe not my thing. Let me get into sales. So yes, that's how I made the transition. And I also got the opportunity to move to Europe through that. And that became my area. So US and Europe was mostly my area throughout my professional corporate life, I would say.
How did you learn to sell?
How did I learn to sell? I think we are all salespeople at some point, right? We are always selling ourselves, just that we don't know. We are always selling something or the other, or at most our own views, or right now that's even what we're doing, right? So we just don't know that we are selling, even though there is again a negative connotation that sales is hard and you have to manipulate, and really none of that is what is actually sales. And that's what I learned when I was actually in sales, not from outside. So yeah, I think it's just innate. We just know, and you do the right thing. And I don't think there are any skills to be learned, even though, to be very honest, I did go through training programs and all that. So that
Right.
helped. Yeah. But yeah, I think innately we are all salespeople.
What would you recommend to someone who's maybe starting out or struggling in sales?
You have to like people if you're in sales.
Mhm.
That I think is one of the important ingredients. If you don't like people, it's very mechanical.
Mm.
So I would say, first of all, definitely like people. You have to also understand business. You have to understand numbers, and you have to. Lots of people say trust is a big component in sales. Like you have to know how to trust, and you have to also be trustworthy, both. And it's interesting that we talk about trust so much in the sales world, and yet salespeople are not seen as very trustworthy. So it's
Mm.
paradoxical that way. Yeah, but that's also because I think you have to trust before others can trust you.
Mhm, mhm,
So
mhm.
I would say these are the 2, 3 things. And of course, if you're interested in sales, you have to get some skills around it.
Mm. And so what are some of those skills?
Uh, you have to know your product, whatever you're selling or service, for sure. You have to find a way to build rapport. And I don't mean just getting very friendly or overstepping boundaries with the intent of building rapport. I do see salespeople sometimes doing that, and that actually takes away trust more than building
Mm.
trust. So you'll have to know, again, the newer world and a newer way of building rapport is very different from what it was when I
Right.
was doing sales. So these are certain just nuances, and I'm speaking more from a behavioral aspect.
Mhm.
But you have to know what you're selling. That's credibility is pretty important. And I think there are tons of other people who are sales gurus who have got lots more to say around this.
Sure,
And
sure, sure. Yeah, yeah, fair enough. Yeah, you don't present yourself as a sales guru, but I know that you worked as head of sales and director of sales before, and then now as a founder and having helped direct and grow Progress U plus grew. Obviously, that's a huge part, right? To sell and have a vision, especially
yes.
to take on something new. You have to sell a new idea, a new product. You have to get traction. So that's part of why I was asking that. So how did that lead to what you're doing now then? You were doing sales, you were doing it, you were clearly put in charge of leading sales and sales teams. And now, how did that lead to where you are now?
Well, there's a bit of an interesting story around that, and I'll keep it short. It was actually I was actually based in London, and I used to travel across various other countries in Europe and make a day trip, and I would keep coming back to London at the end of the day. And I carried my Indian passport, so I had to go through immigration all the time, and it always surprised me that how come I never ran into the same immigration person, like the people stamping your entry, and I was like,
Yeah,
I'm so often here and I don't recognize anybody. They must be having a really good system of rotation where,
yeah.
uh, or lots of people. So whatever it is, I was just fascinated by that. And then one day, there's one person who I recognized, and who recognized me. And he said, you know what, Ruma, it must be really tiring. Another hotel, so much of travel. It must be really tiring. And I said, no, that's the part that I really like the most. You meet new people and you're in a new place. And what are you talking about? And I just went away. But I think somewhere that stayed, not consciously, but more unconsciously or subconsciously, because I remember maybe around 3, 4 months later, I was sitting in another hotel room making a presentation, and I did not like the room. I did not like the shower, and his words came back to me. And I happened to be looking at somehow coaching popped up on my laptop while I was researching my presentation. And I had no idea about coaching, but I loved what that page said. And I somehow remembering, I need to explore this. And I don't know, somehow that led one thing to the other. And I ended up in the training course for coaching, which went on for a year or so. And then I made the shift. I said, I need to do this.
And when did Progress U step into the picture?
Well, Progress U South Asia actually happened in 2014. And this happened in India, and I was well back in India then. And Progress U globally, or in Hong Kong as a group, was actually set up in 2014. Sorry, in 2002. So that was a long time ago and was set up by two gentlemen, European gentlemen, and that But when I joined in 2014, I think Progress U was, or I joined the board of the partnering team. The whole idea was we were looking at something new, expanding because of the whole industry was moving in a certain direction. And my focus or my intention then was more around systems coaching with leadership teams, which essentially meant the CEO and his or her direct reports, and how to bridge the gap between strategy and execution. And a big part of that is how do they relate to each other? So the relational or the relationship aspect came in pretty early on. And that was what my focus area, my contribution to Progress U quite early on.
I love that. Systems coaching with leadership teams focused on strategy and execution, because I know there's two complaints that I hear. And one is the strategy is great, but we can't execute. And the other people say, hey, I would do the work if they would give a clear message. And I feel like it's almost like a yin and a yang. So I feel like you articulated that really well. So you've been doing that. It's almost going on 10 years now, right? It's over 8 years, I believe.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and I think the relationship aspect is only growing, and the understanding and the depth is only growing, and the awareness around that is only growing. Even if I, as you very rightly said, so the leadership teams, while they all buy into a strategy, now they're ready to execute, but most of the time it's only 60% of the strategy that gets executed. And I'm just giving rough numbers over here, but different organizations will have different stuff or different percentages. So there is a gap. And most of that gap is not because they did not know what is to be done or there was something wrong with the strategy. Most of the gap is related to the fact that, everybody in that team are individually brilliant. They have reached there because they're individually brilliant, or maybe brilliant at whatever they do. Now, when you put such brilliant people in a room and you expect them to perform together, ideal situation, they would just blow everything away, right? They would like 10 years, right? Brilliant people all working together. But that's not the reality. And what comes in the way are what's in between them, what's happening in between them. And that's the focus area which I have. And I've seen that works fantastic, when I say works fantastic, there's an awareness around the need for alignment. You can term that more as alignment coaching. There is a need for seeing things differently, which is more systemically. And that also leads me, if I may say, to how I want my latest venture, InnoGrew, as well. We have got a leadership team of 6. And when we started Grew, the whole idea was that we manage or lead differently. Okay. There are lots of talks around head-centered and heart-centered. So heart-centered, head-centered, all of that is fine. But in order to lead differently, self-organized systems, that was something which caught my attention, but not much is known about that, even though there's a lot of text and research that's coming up around that. How do you execute it? And that was the ethos with which we started. And talking about relational and relationship aspect, I thought it's wonderful to start putting that in-house in my team while I'm teaching that, while I'm doing that with other leadership teams. Let's put that into action in my leadership team. Journey has been so far pretty educative and also very phenomenal, if I may add that.
Yeah. Why do you say phenomenal?
Phenomenal because, well, let me backtrack a little bit. So there was a vision that I had, and the vision was obviously with InnoGrew where we wanted the company to go, which was more around middle management and coaching and empowering middle management. And empowering actually for me just means having the freedom of choice. It's really not very hi-fi or highly known definition. It's mostly around having the power of choice. But in order to have that, we need to have different kind of services and innovation around middle management, which is where our focus was. So that's the product part. But when we are coming together as a team, there was another vision that I had, that we wanted all of us to choose our own salary. Okay. So that's pretty different from how normal organizations run. And it's not that people choose the salary and then justify why they're choosing the salary. I said there will be no justification that is needed. But what the method that I want to put in is that while there needs to be, again, the freedom of choice, that this is what I'm doing with no need for explaining why you're choosing something. So I wanted to put in that kind of methodology. So this was the vision. And that was the stated, I think, objective. And we had this group of 6 people that came together, and I was the glue between all of them because they did not know each other. They only just knew me. And why I say phenomenal was how the team aligned with not knowing each other at all, and aligned very quickly, which I think is because of a few reasons. The first reason is, we are all, I'm going to maybe explain this a little bit in detail. So if you don't pull me back, if I go off track, okay?
Okay.
The reason is we are all very, and this is the relational aspect, we're all very anchored and weighted down by cultural anchors or societal anchors or historical anchors. So when we are having such weights, or in normal or in standard terminologies, it's more like beliefs that we have or conditioning that we have, but it's more around, I would say, psychological buildup that we all have. We're all having these kind of weights around us, okay?
Right.
And in order to be able, and we all want to rise up, but then we're not able to because we're weighted down. But in order to be able to rise up, there's some, we all need some help. And, you can call that a framework or sort of model. We call that a frame or a model, which we designed as the RM. A stands for authenticity. Authenticity over here, again, means we are terrified of being seen as bad, not in others' eyes, but in our own eyes. So authenticity and this thing of that we are subconsciously terrified of being seen as bad, takes away from authenticity. So how can we, so we took away the label of bad and good, first of all, and I said nothing bad or good. But so that's where authenticity is born, when we don't label things as bad and good. You might not be doing anything. There is no bad and good, but communicate and say this is what it is and what you're seeing and what you're feeling. So that's where the authenticity part is. And there are more elements to that. I'm just skipping that. But the things that again works, authenticity, A, resonance is the R, which is where you need to be connected with whatever you're doing, which is the heart-centered piece. And when you're connected, which comes from a place of love rather than fear, you're also authentic. So everything feeds into each other. And the third component is you, which is unknown. And our assumption is that we don't know everything about everybody, and we will never know that. So there is a lot of components which are unknown, and that's true for any relationship for that matter. So when there are a lot of components that are unknown, what we assume is that we just know 2%. There is 98% that is not known. And when we are making decisions, or when we are even thinking about somebody through that lens, all that we can say is that that's 2%. Okay?
Right.
Us working with unknown, not only with each other, but actually with the clients, with the business uncertainty, it expands in a big way. And the fourth element is M, which is meta view, which is not only having a vision, but also around mirroring that back. So M stands for meta view and mirror. We interplay that. That means not only are you an observer, but you have to reflect that back. And that feeds back into the A part, authenticity, resonance. So everything feeds into each other. So we found that model to be fantastic to help us grow and move vertically from those horizontal anchors that we have. It's not that we have not had disagreements. We have had where really severe situations where, one of the co-founders was looking whether he should exit or maybe stay because of something's going on in his personal life. So even us navigating those things and using the RM as the base, I thought gives us, so we do have fights, we do have lots of disagreements. That's part of any relationship and growth, I think. But then when I say phenomenal, it's how we come together and step into various roles, because there is no designated head. There is me as the glue, and then everybody else contributing and putting in. Whenever we see something missing, one of us just jumps in. So I say phenomenal because it's self-organized and yet it's working. So, and it's work in progress, I would say.
And I'm curious, I'm sure there's other people listening, the whole choose your own salary thing without justification. I want to organize into your org, and I would like a salary of $1 million net. How does that, what you say there was no I get choosing your own salary. I'm like, okay, people get to pick their own salary, but then you're like, with no justification. That to me, that was like, wait, what? What?
Yeah. Yeah, we have had lots of discussion around this actually. So yes, look, that's where personal responsibility comes in. And when I say personal responsibility, it's your responsibility to yourself and responsibility to organization, because Grew is also yours. So the idea is we have to provide enough information for that for that personal responsibility to kick in. That means if you're choosing your own salary, you have to know the cloth that is available so you can cut your piece from it.
So
right?
let me rephrase that. So you're letting people know these are all the things that have to get done. And you can basically almost, I don't know if Build-A-Bear, it's a store where you build your own teddy bear. You get like a blank and then you choose all the parts and make your own bear. You're basically like, hey, you're here. These are all the things that need to be done. And these are the value of all the different pieces. And you get to build your own bear of a salary. Is that sort of what you're saying?
Yes and no. Like I said, this is still work in progress. And because there's not so much information out there, we are building it ourselves as we're going along.
It's like a co-op. That's almost what a co-op is. A group
yeah.
of people come together and they co-create and run a business, and they all share in the spoils, and they have to figure out how to designate roles and responsibilities. And it's not necessarily tied to income production. Like a sales rep typically would get a larger percentage commission on a sale than customer service because they're attributed to that money. But in a co-op, there's not necessarily that linear line between them. And you're saying this is, I'm just trying to understand. This is, I'm just very fascinated by it. Yeah.
Yes. Again, we as the six people, and we've got 9 coaches with us. So 6 people and 6 co-founders, all of them are brilliant in their own rights. And they have, which is why we're together. Another thing that we did was we actually chose a lot of diversity. And you talked about diversity early on. So we actually, our youngest co-founder is 27 and our oldest is 58. So from an age, and everybody else is in between. So there is age diversity, there is experience diversity, there is gender diversity, there is all kinds of diversity that we could think of. And every individual actually has reached a place of accomplishment or achievement in their lives, wherever they're at, even the 27-year-old, but there is a uniqueness that everybody brings in.
For sure.
There's a brilliance that everybody brings in. Now, when it comes to salary, and when you say that salesperson gets so and so, really, not really. There is no designated salesperson. But we do know that certain people, for example, if I know that I know the market better, I have been in this space for a really long time, and I have contacts, I step in and do what I have to do. And then there's products and services. People step in and do what they have to do. Delivery is a big component, and quality delivery is big component. So delivery, again, not everybody has to deliver, but then you step up and say, okay, this is the piece that I want to do. And you set your own price for that. But, and here's the but is, you just don't look at your own little piece. You have to look at the whole bear. You said building the teddy bear, and you have to figure out, okay, these are the pieces that are going in to make this bear. And I'm doing this little piece. This little piece, considering the whole bear, the value of this is this. So you set your own value. And what we have also gotten going is there is a correction mechanism. That means it's not fixed for 1 year. We actually revise this every 6 months. So there is a correction mechanism. You might have taken more or overestimated more. And the next time you have this piece of correcting yourself. And that's why we are saying we're building this, because it's very fascinating. It's very exciting to see how people are valuing their own selves and how people are valuing the whole entity. So there's a lot of transparency and everything reveals information to us.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I'm very intrigued by it because I think it's an interesting experiment, and I'm curious to see what happens. Maybe I have to have you come back in 6 months and find out what's happening new, because I think there's definitely merit and value. And that's part of, I've been talking about this a lot, but there's a formula for the scientific method proposed by Karl Popper. And that is P1 plus TS plus EE equals P2. So you have problem 1 plus temporary solution plus eliminate the errors equals problem 2. And you eliminate the errors through experimentation, observation, research, and discussion with others, and debates and discourse. and defining things as best as you can. This is just a very interesting experiment on how to eliminate errors in the problem of how do you organize and structure a company. I think it's fantastic in that respect. Yeah, I have some other thoughts, but I think it's interesting. It's very interesting, and you're right. It's how do you. I had a talk with somebody else today in the sense of, for a lot of businesses, if everything depends on the first sale, those businesses typically are really hard to scale and grow. There's no back end. It's a one night stand of a business. So not having a salesperson means there's not someone that's dedicated to bringing new people through the door, but everybody has to make sure that customer stays around, because most everybody knows that the majority of businesses need ongoing, like a regular. Think of people that have a job. All the job is a business with one product and one customer. The product is your time and the customer is your boss, right? So to a certain extent, if you had to find a new job every month, like that would be really tough. So I find that super fascinating. I want to get back some of the other stuff that we go though, because I know we have a fixed time today. I'm just so fascinated about this. I almost feel like we can make the whole call about this, but let's talk about, because you had talked about the systems coaching with leadership teams, strategy and execution and alignment. And how I thought that was really powerful, because in our research for leadership, the strongest factors our research found about leadership were self-awareness, communication, cooperation skills, emotional intelligence skills, and adaptability. And even in your self-organized system experiment here, you even seem to have a strong emphasis on that for leadership, right? That developing those.
Yes.
How did that lead into climate and these other things that you're focused on now?
Yeah, and the key word and the key operative word here is relation and relating. While climate, there is a lot of statistics and a lot of data. There is, for example, if I were to ask you, when you think of climate change, what picture comes to you?
This has changed over time. If you had asked me before COVID, I would say shattered plate, because I used to fly a lot and travel like you, and I always would fly over the Arctic. And I felt like, I remember once I was almost petrified because I felt like it looked like a shattered plate, where I remember times flying over it, it looked like it had been like there were whole pieces. And so to me, that was an alarming thing. If you were to ask me what it means right now, my honest answer would be power and control. My personal opinion is we do need to be stewards of the environment, 1,000%. You can clearly see the impact. I went years and years ago, I went to Thailand for a month on holiday with my, at the time, girlfriend of multiple years. And we went to this remote island. You had to take 2 hours by speedboat to get there, the Similin Islands. And we were camping there, and there's beautiful, spent Christmas, New Year's, this beautiful, really remote, isolated tropical beach. And we were out snorkeling, swimming, and all of a sudden found ourselves in a giant patch of garbage just floating in the ocean. And I was getting stung by jellyfish and all this sort of stuff. So I really believe that we do need to be better stewards of the environment. I don't think it's the emergency being pressed upon us. I am maybe have a shade of conspiracy to me. I know that if you have a poker game and there's $5,000 in the pot and there's no referee, some people may try to cheat to win that. I think we all know that just even in silly competitions with our friends, some of our friends may try to bend the rules. And so I'm of the belief that we have an emergency on the horizon with exponential longer time frame than we've been told. And that time frame is being intensely compressed for the sake of pushing an agenda like a Trojan horse. And that's my personal opinion. I didn't bring you here to talk politics or debate any of this, but you literally asked what came to mind. And those are the honest answers. Those are the honest answers. The honest answers are, there is something and we need to do a better job. But we don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Yeah, and there is a whole political angle, obviously big one, this whole topic that we're talking about. And there is also a whole systemic angle to this topic that we're talking about. These are giant seeds that we are sowing right now that generations later will come and will look up and what did you guys sow?
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
So yeah, and this is hence not to be taken lightly. So there are various ways, and there are various, when I say ways, there are just like with any other topic, there is not just one door to look at the topic. There is just not one door to maybe address that topic. There are multiple doors in multiple ways. And the
Right.
doorway that I've chosen and I look at is the doorway through relationships. You talked about power and control.
Mhm.
Very true. And that happens between people. Power and control. So people are centric to any kind of power and control. People are centric to to the climate change topic. Most people, when they visualize the whole topic of climate change, they don't see people in it.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
and people is actually, and that's the doorway that I'm choosing to bring in the people into this whole topic, and huge topic,
Mm.
and how we as people are thinking, believing, interacting, and relating to the various topics. That includes, how we are relating to the earth and how we are relating
Yep.
to each other. But I do want to come back to power and control, because that's very key and very central and very relational as well. Because every relationship, even with your wife, you will see there is power and control, right? And there are
Mhm.
some elements of power and control. So every relationship has that. And that's something that we talk about in leadership teams as well. But when it comes to climate change, there is an element called scarcity. And again, this is the doorway that I'm looking at. So the scarcity, so scarce resources or scarce whatever that is scarce in the whole world, is there is not enough time, there are not enough ideas, there are not enough products, there are not enough services, there are not enough good people around, there are not enough people doing this. So there's always this element of not enough.
Mm.
Okay. And you can always apply that to yourself as well, where we feel, well, I'm not enough, right? So this not enoughness, this scarcity is very, again, it's in the field and it's more systemic. So when there is scarcity, the element of power always comes in. That means who gets more in those scarce
Mm.
resources, and you're trying to control some things.
Mm.
You feel powerful. And in that field of scarcity, again, systemically, we're always trying to, there is a one-upmanship. And when this comes in, my lens my lens of looking at climate change is, how are we as human beings contributing to this power and control game that we have got?
Mm.
I feel powerful if I'm able to get a lot of resources for myself. That
Mhm.
means if I consume more, probably I feel powerful. If I do this, I feel powerful. If I do that, I feel powerful. So that's the lens that I'm looking at. And my focus is actually to help organizations, which I feel is a bedrock of a lot of people. Like, you get a lot of employees if you go to just one organization, right? So you're able to touch a lot of people in just one go. So the idea is how to create a climate conscious culture, which goes adjacent to whatever company culture that they have, a conscious culture where people are looking at this power and control aspects of themselves, which in turn helps them shift their own relationship with consumerism, with the planet, with and fuse in a little bit more of a systemic awareness, so that
Mm.
the desire to act comes with resonance. Going back again to the RM model, there has to be resonance, and there has to be all of these authentic, unknown, all of these coming in together, the RM coming in together. So that's my base for working with climate change as well: relationships and RM.
Mm. Yeah, relationships. When you say relationships, to me, in my head, I'm hearing like systems thinking, because it's relationships are a network, part of an integrated whole with a system around you. And how much of a fish is water and how much of a fish is just the fish? If you take the fish out of the water, it ceases to perform, right? And so in some way we are all one. I don't want to get too theological here, but in some ways we are really all one. And so I really value and appreciate that. And nobody argued about indoor plumbing. A lot of the advancements that we've had, there's always a pro and con, but they've impacted our species significantly in the majority of ways for better. Literacy, lifting people out of poverty, longer lifespans, higher quality of life. But like you say, that we do have to try to be good stewards of it. So I fully agree with all that. I think there's also a Pareto principle as well, where we have to focus on the critical few things, not the trivial many. And so I really value that. Want to ask, where do you think the future of this is going? Because some of these agendas are being pushed, like we talked about, by non-elected leaders. There's people that are very pro things like ESG. There's other people that point out some of the how it's been politicized. Companies like Philip Morris, a cigarette company, basically a merchant of death, has a phenomenal ESG score. If you look up Chevron, I think it's been updated now, but at once upon a time, Chevron, an oil company that's had massive oil spills around the planet, had a flawless, was like an A+ company. So like we mentioned, there's different agendas, but the core issue is still there. I don't think anyone can really deny you don't want to pee in your drinking water. That's a bad idea. How do you see this moving forward? Maybe I'll add one more thing just as a caveat here too, because our research also showed that corporate social responsibility, which is separate from ESG, is positively correlated to business success, meaning that focusing on ethical values, community development, investing in people, right? Of course, conforming to legal processes. These are things that actually help businesses succeed long term. So I just wanted to add that in there because I don't want people to think I'm against the underlying principles of some of this stuff. But I'm just curious, how do you see these jostling for power? How do you see this unfolding in the next 5 to 20 years?
Yeah, look, we have always jostled for power and we will always continue to jostle for power. All right. So that part is not changing. And I don't think that even if it changes, it's changing like right now. That's not the intent. Again, I say there are multiple paths and multiple doorways, and I feel every path and every doorway has its merit. And yes, there will be intense conflict and intense disagreements all throughout. And I also feel those are opportunities for growth, because if there is no disagreement, we don't really innovate. Yeah. So I do feel every path has merit, and I do feel disagreements at every path are necessary and is needed. And us growing from that is also needed. My path again is I feel that there is there can be things from the top that come. It's mandated, which many governments are doing these days, that these ESG scores or these policies are mandated and all companies have to focus on. And I hope more such mandates are passed, and I hope more such companies follow the line. So that's a path. My path is there can also be a pressure that can be created from the middle. And the mass pressure or the mass tipping point, and I feel that if there is a mass movement of some sort, or we all come together and there is a tipping point to pressure upward. So it doesn't have to be always upward down. It can be from downward up as well.
Managing up. Yeah.
Exactly. And my focus is more around that piece, hence, which is why we created Grow with the middle management, that is power of choice over there. And again, climate and sustainability, both ends, that is right from the top, the leadership level is important. I also feel the middle management and even the middle class awareness around that, if I expand it more societally, there can be a pressure from bottom up. And that's my focus, creating some sort of a tipping point with awareness, with more empowerment, knowing what power and powerlessness is, and how to navigate, and still having a power of choice, even in those moments of powerlessness. So that's my path. And I will not get to my destination before I die, for sure, but I hope that can be carried on.
Yeah, but that's some of the best goals. In 5,000 years, a lot of this isn't going to matter. So I agree with you on that. Yeah, I agree with what you're saying about having to help enable the middle, whether it's middle management or middle class. And we talked before in the meet and greet. Before the middle class, it was a world of kings and peons. It was just that simple. And so it's the same thing. If a company's making less than 100 million, in my point of view, they're still a medium-sized business. And small and medium-sized businesses, we are the middle class. We pay their salaries. We generate that income for ourselves and others. We redistribute the wealth. You talk about a company helping lots of people, right? When you have a giant corporate conglomerate, oftentimes the salaries are not proportionately distributed as they might be closer, still disproportionate, but in a small business store owner a local small business owner might earn more than their staff and employees, but the disparity is not the giant gap that you have maybe in a giant multinational, like the CEO of Coca-Cola versus someone running one of their warehouses type of thing. So I really agree on that and focusing on a two-way conversation. What are some of the biggest mistakes you think people are making right now?
Around this topic,
Yeah.
around climate change, uh, it's the same mistake that we make even with the topic of racism, for example. These are systemic topics. And every time we talk about social inequities or inequalities, any kind of systemic topic, and climate change is a systemic topic. The biggest mistake that we make is actually not seeing that as a systemic topic, or not recognizing or not acknowledging that it's true and it's real. So very early on in our conversation today, I mentioned that all of us are terrified to be seen as human beings. We're terrified to be seen as bad, not by other people, in our own eyes. Half the time we deny climate change, or when we say you're apathetic, it's really not apathetic. It's actually denying that I am contributing to this whole issue, and I continue to do that, and that's what we don't want to see. And we say, but that's something in the future, or we're apathetic, or so there's a disconnection. So I feel the biggest, just for the longest time, if you were to ask me, and I'm an Asian woman, brown-skinned Asian woman. So for the longest time across my corporate career in the US and in the Europe and everywhere, I never saw racism, or I never saw gender inequalities, to be honest. Maybe that was not a focus area, or whatever that was, but my focus wasn't there. Or I just wanted people around me to be good. And that good meant that, hey, they can't be racist. They can't be consciously creating inequities and inequalities. No, so I'm not saying people are consciously doing anything, but what I'm saying is we need to be more conscious about things that we see, more conscious about things that we do. And the biggest mistake, going back to your question, is where we are actually not seeing things. We are not seeing reality the way that it is.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because I think there needs to be more conversation about this. I don't know anyone that's debating necessarily the change, like climate change. I think people are debating the root causes and the ability to impact that, and even the data set. We all know that if, when you're monitoring data, if your data does not have integrity, then you can't trust the numbers that you've got. And so there's different frames of thought. I know some people, they like, oh, I wish I lived back in the medieval ages. But a lot of people don't realize, like in the medieval ages, the average woman had something like 6, 7 kids because only 2 of them would survive. You talked about that you were living, I think it was in the UK. That was an inhospitable country before. Like, I'm from Canada. The pioneers died. Their boats landed, they got off, they went across, they were like, wow, it was springtime. This is beautiful. They had an amazing spring, an amazing summer, and then winter came and killed almost all of them until they developed new knowledge on how to do that. The planet has actually been a very hostile place for humanity. And so I think this is a great opportunity for, exactly like you say, to see the world that it's almost like a yin yang, in my opinion. It's almost like a yin yang, where in some ways we are like, there's the spaceship Earth theory, right? That this planet provides all that we need to sustain, and we need to take care of it because it sustains us.
Yeah.
There's a true reality that is not the case. If you were a human living in Canada, we had to develop knowledge and technology and science to survive in that climate. The actual band that humans can live in is very thin as far as the how far away from the equator you can go, because there's just harsh and inhospitable climates. You couldn't live in the middle of the desert without all the technology we have. So it is this yin yang challenge. I think I fully agree with you that I agree 100% that there needs to be perhaps more discourse and openness to hearing all sides of the story, because at the end of the day, the world's going to keep spinning and moving on. And if we make a mistake and we trash this planet, we kill off our species. We kill off all life on Earth. If we aren't focused on the true levers that we need to push and pull, then we minimize our own odds of success at the same time. So I think what you said is really critically important to the issue. And that's a really important discussion that we need to have. I think that's a really important discussion to be had.
Yeah, and if I may quickly add this little piece, when I said we have to see the reality for what it is, I'm also very conscious of the fact that everybody's reality is different. And how we see the way that I see reality would be very different from the way that you see. And I'm very conscious about that. What is your truth is different from my truth. So there is no one reality, which is why I keep going back to, or I totally agree with what you said, the discourse, the conversation. And okay, if I'm able to combine both our realities and come up with something new, and that's the idea of a discourse or a conversation, is not about me. And that's how I deal with conflicts when I'm looking at aligning leadership
Mhm.
teams and my leadership team. It's not about who said
Right.
who is right. There is a conflict, and there are two points of view, because the system, and if I look at the relationship system, the system is asking, or there is something that is emerging within the system that is asking to be born or to be emerged. So we have to look at conflicts from that lens. What is trying to emerge, not who is right and who is protecting. So that's, I don't think that's how we will evolve. And I feel that's big part of who we are as coaches, either systems coaches or climate change coaches, if we have to foster and grow these kind of discussions which are not polarized, because its reality is different and we have to work with that. We
Well,
cannot.
you say reality is different, or just that people don't see the whole. I might see a percent, like you said 2%. Like I loved for the Arum, the unknown, that lots of things are unknown. So I have to assume that I only see 2%, but that you might only see a 0.5% of the 2% I see, but you see your own 2%. And if we can figure out and put ours together, there may be overlapping, almost like a Venn diagram. When you a lemon and a banana, they're both yellow, right? They're both fruits. So we need to take your perspective and mine and look at what overlaps, so we can actually now maybe see 3% clearly
Yeah.
versus your 2% and my 2%, and actually only having 1% be founded on truth. I just want to clarify that, because when you say that there is no one reality, I feel like when I stand in front of a moving car, there's a real reality that's gonna, but I think I want to active listen and paraphrase back what I'm hearing you say to make sure that that's what you're trying to say, that not everybody sees the whole. Is that accurate? And that,
Yes, and I will build on that. And there is a story that we have in Indian folklore, or it might be more global as well. I'm not sure, that 4 or 5 blind men, they are asked to describe what an elephant is, and everybody goes and touches a part of the elephant. So somebody
yes.
tail, one person touches the trunk, one person
Yeah.
touches the chest, and one person touches the legs. And so that's the reality of what an elephant is. When the person who touched the tail is talking about, oh, an elephant is skin, or skin and with some hair,
Yep.
but that's not the whole elephant, which is what you're talking about as well. The
Yeah.
person touching the is saying, that's my reality. I touched it and I know it is like that.
Yeah.
That's the polarized thing. Whereas what we are talking about is not just bringing the tail and the trunk together and finding a point of intersection. No, what we are trying to do is that is one way of doing it. The other thing is, what are we missing? What if both are true? What do we need? So it is actually expanding that 2%, 2%, they both are true. This is 2%, they're 2%, but they're also separately true. And what we are trying to build is build more knowledge about the unknown, which is why this unknown part is such an important
Yeah.
evolution part in our model,
Oh
which
yeah.
actually is generative. So the whole aspect is, how do we see a newer picture? And we are actually very capable of doing that, if we, as human beings, if we put our heads and minds to that. And that's the, I think, endeavor. Yes, it is towards the whole, and it is towards a newer whole, if
Yeah,
possible.
no, I agree. I agree with exactly what you're saying. I think it's about sharing. It's about sharing in discussions. At the beginning, I mentioned that Karl Popper had a formula for science, and that one was the key part was eliminating the errors, and that's done through observation, experimentation, debate, discussion, data collection, and all these things. And I think it comes down to really sharing and listening and sharing, because that's a really important component of it. Because David Deutsch wrote a fantastic book. It's not an easy read. It's a book you have to pick up a few times over. It's called The Beginning of Infinity. But in it, and I like to say this caveat, because I think I grew up in a house of hard science, but as I get older, I also, like, all science is built on the Big Bang.
Oh
So
yeah.
science, so I love Terence McKenna said this: science will explain the whole universe to you as long as you grant them one godly miracle, the Big Bang, right? Just give me the Big Bang, and then I'll explain everything else for you. And I think there's, again, this is the yin and yang part, right? I think there's two components to it. So in his book, the reason why I mentioned David Deutsch is he talks about the difference between like good science and bad science, and even why we have a scientific method, and that it's really about trying to stop ourselves from fooling ourselves. Because there's all sorts of optical illusions that we've looked at where you see something that's not really there, which line is longer, and you guess, and then, and that's why we have rulers and measurement. And David, I felt, had a really articulate way of explaining it, that good science is very specific explanations that are hard to vary without ruining it all. And I'll give you an example. In Greece, and forgive me because I don't know the myth very well, but there's a myth about why there are 4 seasons. And the story is like some goddess was kidnapped by the king of the underworld and he rapes her. And so the world weeps and we have winter. And then, but her mom made a deal with this devil and she gets to come home for a few months every year. And that's where we have spring and summer. So that's an explanation for why there are seasons. But if you traveled the world and you go, this area, they don't have 4 seasons. They only have 2 seasons, or they only have 1 season. Then you're changing the details, and that ruins the story. So the best science that we have, and this is what science is, and we have to go back, and especially after the last three years, I think we've really discovered that a lot of our science is not good science. And we actually have to go back and reevaluate some of that we've done. But the idea is why we know that we're not the center of the universe. Before, we used to think we were the center of the universe. Everything revolved around us. And part of how we actually figured that out was through telescopes and observing phases of the moon and phases of Venus. It wasn't until that we documented the phases of Venus, just like the moon, full moon, half moon, crescent moon, we observed those with Venus. And now with math and geometry, we could explain that the only way to explain that observation, this real tangible thing that's happening on a cyclical and predictable pattern, is that the explanation is the sun is here and we are at this many degrees this far from the sun with this object this many degrees this far from the sun, going at this speed around these areas. It's such a specific explanation. And if you change any of those details, it all turns to mashed potatoes. And so forgive me, I feel like I got a bit of a soapbox rant there, but I think exactly what you're talking about is there needs to be more sharing and more more sharing and discussion and debate about these things. Part of what I'm concerned about is the mandates. I'm afraid of the mandates, the same way that excess deaths have not declined since COVID has passed, that excess deaths are actually up than before. And we had mandated solutions where there wasn't, and maybe there was time pressure on that, and we didn't have time to observe all the data and have all those discussions. But I think that's why someone like you has a great position of power and contribution where you're facilitating these conversations between people. And I think it's more important than ever that we really try to establish a solid census and listen to the dissenters. It's almost like a business plan. Some people, they want to start a business and they show their plans to people and they ignore the people that tell them why it won't work. When really those are the people they should be listening to most, because they're the ones that are going to tell them about the potholes ahead of the path. And if they can have good answers, good specific explanations for how they will prepare for that potential eventuality, the more robust of a plan it is for everyone. So yeah, I think this is all great. I love all this. I think what you brought in is the systems approach, bringing the individual into it. I think that's incredibly important. It's so easy to look at people as just numbers and figures and bars, ones and zeros, and make decisions that impact thousands and millions of people. Again, look at the mandates we just had through the pandemic. There were people that their whole communities, whole groups of people were just written off in the name of the greater good. And so we have to be very careful. And I think we need facilitators like you to make sure we have these discussions, and maybe we won't know the answer in our lifetimes, but hopefully we'll be a few steps closer. So
I read everything that you said, particularly on the science in the madness. Yes.
Particularly what? Sorry, I
science. The science around the madness. There is a science. Yeah. You also talk about good science and bad science. Again, if we remove the labels, what is left? If we remove good and bad, what is left? Just science.
Evidence. Yeah.
And I think that's what we'll have to work with, because the moment you label something as bad or good, then everybody is trying to move towards the good. Nobody wants
Right.
to be part.
Yeah. Success has many fathers and failure is an orphan. That's right. Yeah.
And that's a very subconscious way of also surviving. If you're with the good, if you're with the majority, you'll survive. So it's a very subconscious method of our own survival and managing scarcity and power. So
Yeah.
all of that takes it in mind. So yeah, that's why again I keep going back to we. And when I say we, my team and I and people that I work with, we are such great big fans, and we all need some sort of an anchor, and RM is our anchor, which keeps helping us move vertically upward, where
Yeah.
when we can be weighed down by the horizontal anchors a lot around
Yeah.
culture and history and all of that.
I'm very fascinated because it just sounds like what you're doing is you've got a value system that you're using to facilitate the self-organized system, and that you're trying to move forward with compassion following evidence. And I think that's almost a recipe I think the whole world should follow at this point, is just more compassion and more discussion about the evidence and comparing evidence and trying to not label people good or bad or right or wrong, but just to make sure that the truth prevails. Because that's, at the end of the day, like I said, like a truck barreling down the road, you may have one perception of reality. The dinosaurs got it wrong. And so we have to be very careful. These are serious topics.
Yeah, and another little story comes to mind. It's raining quite a lot over here, and then many of us, oh, why is it raining? Oh, come on, it's raining another day. So we see rain differently, or some people see rain differently. And for the farmers, they're like, oh, thank God it's raining.
That's right. Yeah.
That's our livelihood. So again, going by in the 2% truth, that's the farmer's truth, which is also true. We cannot say,
Yep.
no, you're wrong. And the farmer cannot tell a city urban person, no, you're wrong. You should not be feeling bad about rain.
Yeah.
See, that will not get us anywhere.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
the relative reality, if you will.
Yeah. No, I love it and I value it. So more sharing is needed, more conversations, more discussion about outcomes and evidence, and then trying to come forward and hopefully move with census. Democracy may not work because everyone may not be equally educated, but I think a democratic republic is a good, where you have representatives and it's their job to be properly informed and to inform their people. And
It's not. Sorry, Daryl.
No, you're good.
It's not just about just conversations. Those conversations have to yield something.
Yes.
That's evolution. The action after that is evolution. So I would not just leave it at conversation and, okay, it was nice, intellectually stimulating conversation. That's it. No. What is the action after that? I think that's also pretty important and critical, that we keep building.
100%.
100%.
And a lot of these innovations actually do also end up being more profitable, which I think is also fantastic. Not in every case, but sometimes, like the dot-com boom, it wired the world, but it was a huge expense. Some people made money, but then a lot of people lost money. But in the long run, it really paved the way for the world that we have today. It gave the world a nervous system. We're all connected now, thanks to that. I know that I want to be respectful of your time. I know that we've gone over. Ruma, is there anything else that I haven't asked you that we should have asked you?
We covered a lot of ground. We just touched upon a lot of topics.
We did. I got a page of notes. I got some action items for myself. If people want to reach out, if they want to talk to you, learn more, what are the best ways for them to get in touch?
An email, definitely LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. That's the only social media that I'm on. And these two, email or LinkedIn. And my email is my first name dot last name @inogru.com, inogru.com.
So go check her out. That's RumaBiswas on LinkedIn. And if you want to email her, it is ruma.biswas@inogru.com. Ruma, thank you so much for coming and joining us and sharing your thoughts and ideas for today. Like as I said, these are important topics. I have children. I care about my children and my great-grandchildren. And I believe that we all want the same thing at the end. And I appreciate you coming and sharing with us. And I would love to hear what's going on and how things turn out. And maybe we'll have to have you back in 6 to 8 months or something.
I would love to. Yes, we would have evolved by then. Thank you. We would have evolved as individuals and human beings by then. The world is changing so fast.
So fast. Thank you so much.
Lovely meeting you and having this conversation, Daryl. Really
Mhm.
useful. And thank you for inviting me again.